Most people will live their entire lives without ever meeting themselves. Not the version shaped by expectation, not the one performing for love, approval, or survival, but the raw, untamed, true self that exists beneath all the noise. This isn't a video about motivation. This is a confrontation with your programming, your patterns, and your pain. If you're on the edge of change, if something deep in you knows the life you're living isn't really yours, then this message was meant for you. If this resonates with you, consider subscribing. It helps more than you think, and it keeps this kind of content alive. Now, let's begin. There is a moment, quiet, unannounced, when a person begins to vanish from their own life. Not in a dramatic collapse, not with headlines, hospital beds, or divorce papers, but with a slow, imperceptible unraveling. A man wakes up, makes his coffee, kisses his partner, checks the news, sends the email, smiles during the meeting, laughs at the joke, and yet something inside him doesn't move. He has everything he was told to want, and still there's a voice, barely audible, whispering, "Is this it?" This is not a breakdown. It is a quiet collapse. Not the midlife crisis you've heard of, the kind with motorcycles, hair dye, or affair cliches. This is different. This is the kind no one talks about, because no one can see it happening. It hides behind normalcy, behind perfectly arranged dinner tables and LinkedIn promotions, behind PTA meetings and birthday selfies, behind the practiced smile of someone who's followed every rule and still feels utterly hollow. Midlife, for many, isn't a celebration of how far they've come. It's the sudden awareness of how deep they've buried themselves. You followed the path. You built the career. You raised the family. You played the part. But somewhere between success and survival, something was left behind. A pulse, a fire, a self. It didn't happen overnight. It never does. It happened in tiny compromises, in silenced questions, in slowly learning how to stop dreaming, because dreaming made the days harder to endure. And here, in the silence of this invisible collapse, you encounter a strange realization. It wasn't failure that broke you. It was success. You did everything you were supposed to, and it still wasn't enough. Now you feel like an actor reading a script that no longer makes sense. You hear your own voice and wonder when it became so distant, so managed, so unlike you, and so you search, not with your hands but with your mind. You begin to scan the past, the choices, the compromises. You wonder if there was ever a moment when you were truly free, or if freedom was just another story, told by people who gave up long ago. It's in this fragile moment, standing between numbness and madness, that Nietzsche arrives, not as a philosopher in a book, but as a shadow in the room, a witness to your private despair, because Nietzsche saw it coming, this collapse. He saw the danger not in suffering, but in sedation. He saw how people lose their souls, not through tragedy, but through slow conformity. He called it the death of God, but it wasn't just religion he was mourning. It was the collapse of meaning itself. Nietzsche didn't write for academics. He wrote for the lost, for the ones who smiled in crowds and cried in parking lots, for the ones who achieved everything, and yet feel like ghosts in their own story. To Nietzsche, the midlife collapse isn't just personal, it's philosophical, it's cultural. It's the moment when the lies that built your world finally crack, and what's left staring back at you is nothing. He called it the abyss. Not a place, but a presence. The realization that beneath the scaffolding of your life, the job, the image, the identity, there is no solid ground, just endless, silent space. But Nietzsche didn't run from the abyss. He stared into it. He made it his companion, because he believed that only by facing the nothingness could we create something real. That's where this story begins. Not with a bang, but with a whisper. Not with chaos, but with calm. The calm before the mirror breaks. This isn't a documentary about philosophy. It's about what happens when the philosophies we were taught stop working. It's about the terrifying freedom that appears when the old stories collapse and the new one hasn't arrived yet. It's about you, not the version you show the world, but the one that wakes up at 3 a.m. and wonders what any of this means. We live in an age obsessed with optimization, with productivity, with efficiency. But Nietzsche asked something dangerous. What if meaning matters more than happiness? What if suffering isn't something to escape, but something to transform? In the chapters ahead, we will walk with him, and with you, through the ruins, through the myths of success, the ghosts of certainty, the silent war between who you became and who you were meant to be. Because maybe midlife isn't a collapse. Maybe it's a shedding, a revolt, a rebirth. But first, you must step into the abyss and ask yourself the question that begins everything. What if the life you've built is the very thing that's killing you? We're taught the story early, not through sermons or textbooks, but through repetition, through the smiles of proud relatives, through school assemblies, through sitcoms and advertisements. Study hard, get the grades, go to a good university, get the job, climb the ladder, marry, have kids, buy a house, retire. This isn't just advice, it's a blueprint. And for a while it seems to work. You tick the boxes, you check the metrics, you keep moving forward. But then, you arrive, and something feels wrong. It's not that anything is missing, it's that everything is there, everything you were told to chase. And yet, inside, there's a numbness, a fatigue that no weekend getaway can fix. You begin to realize, maybe it wasn't your life you were living, maybe it was a script. Nietzsche had a name for this: herd morality. The idea that most people don't live, they follow, not out of cowardice, but out of habit, out of fear, out of convenience. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he mocked the last man, the one who thinks he's fulfilled because he has comfort, routine, safety. But fulfillment without freedom, he warned, is just sedation. And in The Gay Science, Nietzsche drops the bombshell. We have art in order not to die of the truth that most people mistake obedience for meaning. They spend decades proving their worth in systems designed to keep them quiet. You weren't taught to think, you were trained to fit. The social script sells comfort, not purpose, stability, not authenticity. It teaches you how to perform success, not how to define it. This was never about becoming yourself, it was about becoming what others would approve of. But Nietzsche didn't buy into it. He saw through the smiling family portraits and the office celebrations. He saw the despair hiding behind polite conversations, the dull ache of those who forgot how to dream. He wrote not for the herd, but for the one who's begun to question it. And here's the part no one likes to admit. Conformity feels good, there's safety in being liked. There's warmth in doing what everyone else does. But deep down you can feel it, the subtle betrayal, the quiet scream of the self you left behind to fit in. In Nietzsche's eyes, modern life became a performance. We perform productivity, we perform stability, we perform happiness. But underneath the performance lies emptiness. This isn't just philosophical, it's psychological. In a post-industrial world, your worth isn't measured by who you are, but by what you produce. You are your job title. You are your LinkedIn profile. You are the number of unread emails in your inbox. This is not identity, this is machinery. We traded our souls for efficiency, our passions for predictability, our uniqueness for approval. And when midlife comes, not with a scream, but with a slow suffocation, you begin to see it. You begin to feel the dissonance between what your life looks like and what it feels like. You remember the artist you once wanted to be, the places you dreamed of seeing, the risks you wanted to take. And you wonder, when did I stop choosing? Nietzsche didn't blame society blindly. He blamed the individual's refusal to rebel, to confront the system not with violence, but with awareness. Because here's the most dangerous lie, that this life is the only way, that the checklist is sacred, that deviation is failure. But Nietzsche believed in another kind of life, one forged not by expectation, but by will. He called it the will to power, not dominance over others, but mastery over yourself, to create values, to design a life that is yours, not borrowed, not inherited, yours. And yet it comes with a cost, because the moment you break from the script, you become visible, not in the glamorous way, but in the threatening way. The world doesn't applaud those who walk away, it questions them, fears them, mocks them. But maybe that fear is a compass, maybe what frightens others is exactly where you should go. The lie of fulfillment is seductive. It promises comfort, it promises belonging, but it also promises this, that you will never meet yourself. And so many never do. They reach their 40s, their 50s, and realize they've built a castle with no soul inside. A kingdom of checkmarks, a life with no fingerprints. Nietzsche's message wasn't one of despair. It was a dare, to shatter the script, to step off the path, to risk loneliness, for the chance at truth. Because here's the paradox. Only by losing the life you were given, can you find the one you were meant to live. So ask yourself, if you've done everything right, why does it feel so wrong? There's a point in every life, not always loud, not always noticed, when something sacred collapses, a belief, a dream, a person, a god, and in the silence that follows, a question appears, ancient, patient, unforgiving. What now? For Nietzsche, this question wasn't academic, it was personal, it wasn't whispered from a distance. It screamed inside him. When you gaze long into the abyss gazes also into you. That line has become a cliché, printed on posters, quoted in films, tossed around in psychology forums, but Nietzsche didn't mean it poetically, he meant it existentially. The abyss is not metaphor, it is what remains when all illusions die. In his early life, Nietzsche believed in many things: God, Germany, progress, love, academia. He was brilliant, the youngest tenured professor in the history of his university, a prodigy, a rising star. And then, one by one, the lights went out. He lost his faith in Christianity, not out of rebellion, but from staring too closely at its contradictions. He lost his position in academia, a system he found cowardly, intellectually timid, allergic to truth. He watched his friendships crumble, including his bond with Wagner, his idol. He watched his health deteriorate, migraines, blindness, nausea. He watched his mind fracture, and eventually, he lost even himself. In 1889, Nietzsche broke completely. One moment, he was walking the streets of Turin. The next, he was throwing his arms around a beaten horse, sobbing uncontrollably, before collapsing into madness. He never recovered. He lived the rest of his life in silence, a ghost, a patient, a relic of brilliance now locked behind vacant eyes. Most saw it as a tragic end, but maybe it was something more. Nietzsche didn't go mad because he was weak. He went mad because he stared into the abyss and refused to look away. He dismantled every lie. He pulled apart every comfort. He rejected every system that tried to shield him from the terror of freedom. And freedom is terrifying, because when you remove the scaffolding, religion, status, family, morality, what's left is space, vast, empty, echoing space, no purpose, no instruction manual, no applause, just you, alone, facing the terrifying possibility that meaning is not given, it must be made. That is the abyss, the place where all certainties die, the cathedral of your beliefs, collapsing inward, silently, beautifully, devastatingly. And Nietzsche walked into it. But here's what makes him different. He didn't run from the collapse. He welcomed it. He called it revaluation of all values, a philosophical demolition, not just of religion, but of every inherited idea, every tradition passed down without question, every morality that smothered the individual under the guise of virtue. In that void, he saw not despair, but possibility. Because once the house burns down, you're free to build something new, but very few dare to look that far down. Even fewer dare to look that far down. Even fewer dare to jump. Most people, when confronted with the abyss, retreat, back to comfort, back to conformity, back to the known. They make peace with half-truths. They convince themselves that a quiet, numb life is better than the vertigo of uncertainty. But some don't turn away. Some feel the vertigo and step forward, and when they do, the abyss looks back. What does that mean? It means the moment you confront the void, it begins to shape you. It tests you, it reveals you, not the curated version of you, not the one you show others, but the self underneath the masks, the primal, chaotic, real self, the self unprotected by dogma or delusion. It is not depression, it is not nihilism, it is the death of innocence. And for Nietzsche, that death was sacred, because only after everything false has died, can something true be born. This is the part of Nietzsche that people misunderstand. They see the darkness, they fear the madness. They miss the courage. He wasn't a pessimist, he was a radical realist. He believed the human spirit is strongest when it confronts its own extinction, and chooses to rise anyway. In that sense, Nietzsche's collapse is a mirror. It shows us what happens when someone chooses truth over comfort, when someone refuses to be sedated by belief, career, or tradition, when someone demands something real, no matter the cost. And the cost was everything. He paid with his mind, his peace, his reputation. But in return, he gave us something rare, a map of the void, a blueprint for those brave enough to build without illusions. This isn't about celebrating suffering, it's about understanding what lies beyond it. Because when your life falls apart, When your gods die, when your dreams dissolve, you stand at the same edge, and you must decide, will you run, or will you stare back? Because the abyss will look into you, it will show you everything you've denied, repressed, ignored, and if you let it, it might also show you who you really are. God is dead. God remains dead. And we have killed him. When Nietzsche wrote these words in The Gay Science, he wasn't making a bold declaration. He was sounding an alarm, not a celebration, but a eulogy. Because for him, the death of God wasn't the end of religion. It was the end of something far deeper. Shared purpose. For thousands of years, God wasn't just a deity. He was the architecture of meaning, the North Star of morality, the invisible thread that connected pain to purpose. God explained why we suffer, why we strive, why we hope. But in Nietzsche's time, and even more so in ours, that thread was severed. Science explained the universe. Industry redefined human worth. Rationalism replaced revelation. And slowly, God slipped away, not with a bang, but with silence, with absence. And Nietzsche, one of the first to truly grasp the consequences, asked the terrifying follow-up question. If there is no divine order, what justifies anything? If there's no ultimate judge, no eternal life, no cosmic justice, then what does it all mean? Without God, what anchors right and wrong? Without heaven, what makes pain bearable? Without a higher purpose, why wake up at all? These are not abstract puzzles. These are questions that erupt in midlife, when borrowed beliefs begin to crack, when the family is raised, the career is built, the mortgage is paid, and still, something feels hollow. Because even if you never considered yourself religious, you were raised in a world still structured by religious logic. Good is rewarded, suffering has purpose, there's a reason behind the chaos, a father watching over it all. And now, that structure is gone, or worse, still mimicked by secular systems that pretend to offer meaning, but don't. Work replaces worship, productivity replaces piety, following your passion replaces divine calling, politics replaces salvation, brands replace identity, but they don't satisfy, because they weren't built to. These are placeholders, stand-ins for something we no longer believe, but still desperately need. We try to fill the void with ideology, consumption, distraction, but the void remains. Nietzsche saw this coming. He wrote of the last man, the creature who comes after the death of God. He's not a monster, he's not evil, he's comfortable, he doesn't seek truth, he avoids pain, he lives for little pleasures, shallow entertainment, safety, sedation. He no longer climbs mountains, he gardens at the base, and tells himself it's enough. The last man doesn't collapse, he decays, slowly, politely, invisibly. And Nietzsche feared this above all, not chaos, not violence, but comfort without meaning. Because once the divine scaffolding is gone, the question isn't just what now, it's who will dare to create meaning from scratch, and most won't. Instead we see what we see today, people floating, burnt out by jobs that promise passion, but deliver emptiness, exhausted by politics that ask for faith, but offer spectacle, lonely in families built from duty, not desire, and worst of all, blaming themselves for feeling lost. But what if the loss you feel isn't yours alone? What if the void isn't a personal failure, but the echo of a dead God? This is what Nietzsche meant, not that God died in heaven, but that he died in us, that the stories that once made sense of suffering have vanished, and we haven't replaced them. Not really. We have slogans, therapy speak, biohacking, manifestation, life coaching, but none of it touches the soul the way myth once did, the way ritual once did, the way belief once did. Nietzsche didn't offer easy answers. He didn't want to, because he believed that true meaning isn't given, it's created, forged, and to forge something, you first need fire, destruction, loss. That's why he called for a revaluation of all values, a reset, not to return to old gods, but to birth new ones, not to restore meaning, but to invent it. He believed in the possibility of the Übermensch, the overman, the one who rises after the death of all false meanings and creates a life worth living. But not everyone can rise. Some will cling to the past, others will escape into pleasure, some will numb themselves, many already have, because the death of God left a silence, and silence is hard to live with. But maybe, just maybe, that silence is an invitation, a space, a canvas, a beginning, because when every borrowed meaning dies, you are left with the terrifying freedom to create your own, not just privately, but honestly, without applause, without certainty, without promise of reward. It's not easy, but nothing real ever is. So if you feel the void, if you wake up with that ache, if you look at your life and wonder what it's all for, know this: you are not broken, you are not weak, you are not alone. You are standing in the shadow of a cultural death. You are walking through the ruins of a world that no longer believes in itself. You are feeling what Nietzsche felt, and asking what only the brave ever ask: if nothing is sacred anymore, what will I choose to make sacred? What if your greatest potential never truly dies? It just gets buried beneath everything you've used to avoid it. Midlife doesn't come with a warning sign. It arrives quietly. You wake up one day, and suddenly, the goals you once chased feel weightless. The job, the car, the house. You're not failing, you're functioning. But inside, something has stalled. You're stuck in routines that once inspired you. Now, they feel like rituals of avoidance. And Nietzsche saw this centuries before anyone called it a midlife crisis. To him, the core human drive was never survival. It wasn't even happiness. It was the will to power, the inner engine that pushes you to transcend yourself. Not domination, not cruelty, but the raw urge to grow, to overcome, to create, to command your destiny in a world that offers none. But instead of power, we numb. We reach for the easy, the algorithmic scroll, the bottom of the glass, the binge that lets you forget you're not lazy, you're tired, and numbness is easier than facing the deeper truth. You've betrayed yourself. Nietzsche warned us: the longer we avoid the call to confront chaos, the weaker we become in spirit. We lose what he called Lebenslust, the lust for life, not pleasure, passion, intensity, fire. The will to power dies not in a blaze, but in slow sedation. Let's look closer. The modern world is engineered for avoidance. Capitalism thrives not on your fulfillment, but on your discontent. When you feel empty, you consume. When you're anxious, you scroll. When you ache, you buy. Every numbing agent is sold to you as convenience, but it's a leash. Nietzsche called this spiritual laziness. When you outsource your courage to comfort, when you mistake coping for living, when you think you're escaping pain but really, you're escaping transformation. Because here's the truth: power only emerges in pain. The will to power is forged in friction. The gym, the journal, the confrontation you've been avoiding, all of it is resistance. And resistance is the gymnasium of the soul. But most people never make it past the first threshold of discomfort. Instead, they build entire lives designed to avoid ever meeting themselves. They numb their hunger with distractions, until the hunger dies, and with it, their fire. Psychologists today call it behavioral suppression. Neuroscientists observe it in dopamine feedback loops, where the brain learns to crave the numbing more than the growth. We don't choose addiction. We fall into it, because it's easier than awakening. But Nietzsche never gave in to the easy. He believed you are meant to become who you truly are, not who society asks you to be. And that becoming isn't gentle. It's war, against your past, against your weakness, against your soothing routines that promise relief, but deliver erosion. You may look composed, you may even be admired, but inside, there's a part of you that knows you've traded your will to power for the will to numb. Yet Nietzsche didn't write to shame you. He wrote to remind you power is not dead, it's dormant. Every addiction, every distraction, every dopamine spiral you've spiraled into, is reversible, but only if you face what you've avoided: your pain, your potential, your chaos. He once wrote, you must still have chaos in yourself to give birth to a dancing star. That chaos is your signal, not a flaw, a call. Numbness may feel safe, but it will never give birth to stars. This is why Nietzsche's philosophy isn't just theory, it's a mirror, a challenge, a dare. He dares you to step into your life's ring and fight for something deeper, not success, not applause, but authenticity. To reclaim the will to shape your life, not sleepwalk through it, but how. It begins not with action, but with attention. Pay attention to what you run from, to what you sedate, to where your rituals no longer serve you. Then, don't run, don't numb, stay, breathe, face it. Choose discomfort over distraction, one moment at a time. In doing so, you are no longer sedating your life, you are sculpting it. And in that sculpting, power returns, slowly, quietly, in the form of confidence, clarity, and a spine that stiffens when the world wants you limp. This is what Nietzsche meant by the Übermensch, not a superior man, but a self-created one. Someone who doesn't inherit their identity from culture, but but carves it from chaos. The will to power is not aggression, it is authorship. You can numb your pain, or you can write it into strength, but not both. And so the question returns, the one at the center of this crisis: are you mastering your life, or medicating it? Nietzsche knew the difference. Most don't. And that's why midlife doesn't destroy you. Numbness does. But power, real, untamed, soul-wired power, that's still in you, waiting, not for the right moment, but for your decision. There is a phrase Nietzsche wrote that echoes like thunder through time: become who you are. It sounds like advice, but it's really a dare, a provocation, a sentence with teeth. Because in a world obsessed with identity, conformity, and performance, how do you even begin to uncover who you are beneath it all? How do you become someone you've never met? From the moment you're born, the world starts writing your script. Your family tells you who you're supposed to be. School molds your mind into obedience. Culture hands you a menu of acceptable dreams. And soon, you're not living. You're rehearsing. Rehearsing for approval. Rehearsing for safety. Rehearsing for belonging. And that's the tragedy. Most people never meet themselves. They meet their reflection in others' expectations. They live as an echo, not a voice. Nietzsche knew this. He saw it everywhere. In the blind followers of religion, in the cowardice of academia, in the social masks of polite society. So he demanded something radical. Individuation. And decades later, Carl Jung would take this idea and drive it deeper into the psyche itself. To become who you are, Jung said, you must confront the parts of yourself you've buried, the parts you were told were unacceptable, ugly, shameful, dangerous. The parts you locked away to survive. He called it the shadow. The shadow isn't evil. It's honest. It holds the truth you weren't allowed to speak, the rage you weren't allowed to show, the desires you were told to suppress. And midlife is when the mask starts to crack. It's when the shadow knocks. Maybe you feel it as restlessness, or anger, or a sudden emptiness after years of achievement. Maybe you've done everything right, and yet it all feels wrong. This isn't failure. This is yourself, coming back for you. But here's the terrifying part. What if the person you've been pretending to be is killing the person you're meant to be? What if every smile that hides your truth is another inch of suffocation? What if the job, the marriage, the reputation, everything you've built, is a fortress around your real self? And what if, to become who you are, you have to burn it down? This is why Nietzsche called it the impossible task. Because it's not self-improvement. It's not a productivity hack. It's not finding your passion. It's death. The death of your false self. The death of the obedient identity. You don't become by adding more. You become by subtracting, layer by layer, belief by belief, until all that remains is something raw, something untamed, something terrifyingly real. And from that rawness, you build a life that is yours. But be warned, the world will resist. It will call you selfish. It will call you crazy. It will try to pull you back into the herd. Because if you escape, if you become truly free, it forces everyone else to confront their own prison. Most people don't want to become who they are. They want to be liked. But you're here, you're listening. And maybe, just maybe, something inside you is stirring. Maybe you're tired of pretending, tired of performing, tired of betraying the one person you can't escape, yourself. If so, this is your invitation. Not to be perfect, not to be certain, but to be real. To walk away from the life you were handed, and toward the life you must create. So how do you begin? You begin by asking dangerous questions. What do I actually want? What beliefs feel heavy on my skin? What part of me have I exiled, just to be loved? What truth am I too afraid to say out loud? You begin by listening to the shadow, not as an enemy, but as a guide. You begin by realizing that your breakdown might be your becoming. Nietzsche didn't promise comfort, he offered confrontation. And in that confrontation, liberation. Becoming who you are isn't a single moment. It's a war with your past, your programming, and your fear. But if you're willing to face it, if you're willing to step into the unknown without a script, you'll discover something no one can give you, and no one can take away: yourself. When the scaffolding of reason begins to crack, when careers plateau, relationships hollow, children grow distant, and mirrors reflect someone you no longer recognize, logic fails to comfort. The midlife mind, stripped of distraction, finds itself wandering into older terrain, not the terrain of science or fact, but something older, something primal. Myth, for Nietzsche, myth was not mere fiction, it was blood memory, the symbolic language of a soul too complex to be managed by rational syllogisms. He once wrote, "The death of myth is the death of culture. In a world increasingly defined by data, numbers, graphs and metrics, the death is nearly complete, and with it, so too dies our ability to interpret suffering in any meaningful way." This section is not about stories, it's about survival, because when the modern person falls into the abyss of midlife, they do not reach for another spreadsheet, they reach for a narrative. Nietzsche understood that myth was how early civilizations survived chaos. It was not about whether the stories were true, but whether they carried truth. All myths gave pain a place. They gave death a purpose. They gave suffering a frame. Without them, we are left to wander naked in the winds of the meaningless. And in our time, a curious thing is happening. As institutional religion fades, as tradition weakens, as science refuses to offer comfort, myth is returning, but not through gods of Olympus or prophets of the desert. It returns in stranger forms in conspiracy theories, political cults, messianic influencers, utopian startups, digital gurus who promise rebirth through productivity, wellness, or hustle. These are the new mythologies, and those in midlife, standing at the shattered altar of their own life story, are often the most desperate for them. Why? Because the promises of modernity, progress, comfort, freedom, rarely explain the pain. They offer convenience, not meaning. And as Nietzsche warned, when God dies, man does not become liberated. He becomes vulnerable to any voice loud enough to echo in the silence. This is the danger Nietzsche foresaw, with terrifying clarity. Without a central myth, we do not become rational atheists calmly navigating life. We become fragmented psyches, each grasping for a new center, a new savior, a new narrative, to baptize our pain. In midlife, that desperation intensifies. The old myths, religion, patriotism, family, success, begin to ring hollow. And so people turn to alternatives, wellness cults, ancestral diets, financial messiahs, psychedelic evangelists, political saviors, tech utopias, not because they are gullible, but because they are starving. We are not rational creatures. We are myth-making animals, born with a deep need to explain what hurts. Nietzsche's idea of eternal recurrence wasn't a scientific theory, it was a psychological myth. A mental test. Imagine living this exact life again and again, infinitely. Would you still choose it? Would you still say yes? It's not meant to scare, it's meant to awaken, to shake you from the slumber of default living. Eternal recurrence asks, if you had to relive this existence eternally, would it still be worth it? If not, then perhaps you've accepted a life that is unworthy of your one wild existence. This is why Nietzsche didn't mourn the loss of myth. He sought to resurrect it, not in the form of superstition, but in the form of existential fire. He believed myth was not childish. It was the only language capable of containing the chaos of life. And so we arrive at the modern paradox. We live in an age of unparalleled knowledge, and yet the hunger for myth has never been more urgent. Midlife collapse is not just a crisis of time, it is a crisis of narrative. The story you were told doesn't fit anymore. The ending you expected, happiness, wholeness, peace, never arrived. And so the soul begins to drift. Some find art, some find ideology, some find madness. All are seeking myth, not as fantasy, but as salvation. Nietzsche didn't want us to go backward, to readopt the lies of the past. He wanted us to go deeper, to create new myths that could withstand the truths of modernity, without surrendering to despair. The Übermensch was not a dictator or a genius. He was a mythic ideal, someone who creates meaning, even when none is given. Because without myth, modern man is like a compass with no north. He spins, moves, tweets, buys, consumes, but goes nowhere. Midlife makes this visible. For some it is the first time they realize they are not living their story, they are trapped in someone else's, and that realization can shatter the psyche. Yet within that fracture lies potential. The return of myth need not be dangerous, it can be liberating, but only if we're conscious of it, only if we recognize that every life needs a guiding narrative. And if the one you inherited no longer fits, then you must become the mythmaker. This is Nietzsche's hidden demand, that we stop outsourcing meaning to systems, ideologies, and institutions, and start crafting it ourselves. That we take the raw material of suffering, confusion, and time, and forge it into story. This does not mean inventing fantasies, it means living symbolically, interpreting your pain as sacred, your longing as holy, your despair as a teacher. The man in midlife, who feels empty, is not broken, he is mythically unanchored, and so he searches, not for answers, but for a lens, a myth, a why. And here, Nietzsche's philosophy turns from bleak to blazing, because in the absence of inherited purpose, we are free to create one worthy of our suffering. The myth you need may not come from books, religion, or politics. It may be quiet, personal, built slowly over years, a philosophy you live, not preach, but it must be yours, because in an age of meaninglessness, to create a myth that justifies your pain may be the most defiant, most sacred act left. There is no grand announcement when the soul dies, no funeral, no eulogy, only a quiet settling, like dust, into routines that no longer ask anything of you. You call it stability, you call it peace. But somewhere, under the fluorescent hum of your office, beneath the glow of another screen, the question lingers, is this all there is? Nietzsche foresaw this long before it became the norm. He called it the last man, not a villain, not a tyrant, but something worse, a satisfied slave, a human being stripped of all higher ambition, addicted to comfort, allergic to risk, and frightened of pain. He does not strive, he does not suffer, he simply persists. You recognize him everywhere now, not in a person, but in a pattern. In the man who scrolls through his phone for hours, not out of curiosity, but to avoid a feeling. In the woman who repeats empty affirmations because real confrontation would shatter her self-image. In the father who works a job he hates for a family he no longer knows how to speak to. This is not a crisis of resources, it is a famine of spirit. The last man is not lazy, he is efficient, productive, successful by every external metric. But look closely, and you'll see it. His energy is never truly alive. It's borrowed from caffeine, from algorithmic dopamine, from obligations he doesn't remember choosing. His laughter is rehearsed, his sadness is numbed, his dreams, outsourced. Nietzsche's warning wasn't political, it was existential. He saw that the more we eliminate discomfort, the more we eliminate the possibility of greatness. Because to create, to transform, to become, requires friction. It demands suffering, and in our pursuit of a painless life, we've sterilized the very experiences that make life meaningful. Look at modernity's false idols: convenience, safety, balance. We build lives with padded walls, every risk assessed, every emotion managed. But a life that never bleeds, never burns, never breaks, is also a life that never becomes. We praise mental health, but pathologize discomfort. We speak of trauma, but use the word to mean inconvenience. We sit in therapy rooms asking for tools, not to grow, but to avoid pain. Nietzsche would call this spiritual cowardice. The modern person doesn't need a dictator. He has Netflix. He doesn't need a religion. He has productivity hacks and weekend retreats. He doesn't need to be censored. He self-edits. He filters every word, every opinion, every desire, through the algorithm of social acceptability. And in doing so, he becomes less dangerous to others, but most tragically, to himself. You were not made for this kind of safety. Not entirely. There is a fire buried in your ribcage that cannot live on tepid routines and polite ambitions. And yet, from birth, you were taught to suppress it, to trade the wild for the reasonable, to become someone who does what's expected, who plays nice, who survives quietly. But what if survival isn't the point? What if your life is meant to be an act of rebellion against the numbing tide? What if you are not here to maintain, but to transform, not to cope, but to climb? Nietzsche believed that suffering was sacred, not as punishment, but as the crucible of transformation. That only through struggle does one earn the right to become themselves. But struggle has been rebranded. Today, it's something to eliminate, not embrace. Discomfort is treated like a design flaw, not a necessary friction. But a life without friction is a life without fire. And so we build soft prisons. We celebrate mediocrity and call it kindness. We dull ambition and call it peace. We pathologize intensity and call it toxicity. All while wondering why we feel so hollow. Comfort has become our god, and it is a cruel one, because while it shields you from the sting of the world, it also robs you of the urge to reach beyond it. The last man lives longer, but lives less. He avoids breakdowns but never experiences breakthroughs. He does not fall, but he never ascends either. Midlife, then, is not a breakdown. It is a message, whispered through restlessness, carried in your fatigue. You were not made for this. You were not meant to be lulled into passive existence. You were meant to fight for your soul, and not with slogans or self-help mantras, but with the courage to face your pain without sedation, to suffer and still choose creation, to be rejected and still offer your truth, to be broken and still choose the harder path. That is the opposite of the last man. That is a beginning. But here is the dilemma. Comfort feels good, so good in fact, that many will never leave it. They will choose sedation over transformation, pleasure over passion, certainty over truth, and they will call it wisdom, they will call it adulthood, they will call it peace, and slowly, silently, they will forget how to feel anything at all. You can sense this in yourself. The days blur, the nights buzz with low-grade anxiety, the questions return, the ones you thought you outgrew, and in the silence between them, you begin to wonder, would I rather be comfortable and hollow, or heroic and broken? It's not an easy question. Nietzsche didn't pretend it was, because being heroic in this age doesn't mean fame or glory. It means carrying pain without numbing it. It means building meaning without borrowing it. It means choosing truth when lies would be easier, and perhaps most terrifying of all. It means choosing yourself in a world that would prefer you didn't. So when the moment comes, when life offers you the quiet death of comfort, or the violent birth of transformation, ask yourself not what is easier, or safer, or more rational. Ask yourself only this: which choice makes you feel alive? There's a misconception about Nietzsche, that he was a prophet of despair, that his message was all abyss and no escape. But if you listen closely, beneath the cries of madness and the collapse of God, there's something strangely luminous, a flicker of hope, mad, defiant, and deeply human. At the heart of that hope is one of his most radical ideas, Amor Fati, the love of one's fate, not just acceptance, not tolerance, but love. My formula for greatness in a human being, Nietzsche wrote, is Amor Fati, that one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity. This isn't self-help optimism. It's the opposite. Amor Fati is the brutal, beautiful choice to look at your entire life, the pain, the loss, the failure, the shame, and say, yes, let it be so. By the time we hit midlife, many of us have been carrying pain for decades, regrets we never speak aloud, talents we buried to fit in, dreams we traded for mortgages, and underneath it all, a feeling we can't quite name, a sense that we've become strangers to our own story. This is the abyss. It doesn't come with a warning. One morning, it just opens beneath you. In a hospital waiting room, a divorce lawyer's office, the moment your child says, "You're always on your phone," and when it does, the temptation is to run, to numb it, rebrand it, or worse, to misdiagnose it as failure. But Nietzsche believed that the abyss isn't death. It's a door, a portal to something greater than comfort, transformation. Modern psychology is catching up to what Nietzsche intuited 150 years ago. Today, therapists speak of post-traumatic growth, the process by which people emerge from breakdowns not just healed, but radically reborn. In Jungian analysis, it's the integration of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we deny. In existential therapy, it's confronting radical freedom, the terrifying realization that you are the author of your life. And in narrative psychology, it's called restorying, rewriting the plot you were handed. But Nietzsche said it simplest: become who you are. This is not easy work. In fact, it often masquerades as ruin, a career falling apart, a marriage unraveling, a midlife nervous breakdown. But under the wreckage is a question waiting to be answered. Now that you have nothing left to prove, what do you want to become? It's tempting to see Nietzsche's descent into madness as the tragic end of a tortured genius. But what if it was part of the message? What if his breakdown was not a failure of his philosophy, but a fulfillment of it? Nietzsche stared into the abyss so deeply, he disappeared. But before he vanished, he left us a strange roadmap, not away from suffering, but through it. Amor Fati isn't an escape from the fire, it's stepping into it, and realizing you don't burn. The modern world fears discomfort, it medicates sadness, it treats confusion as pathology, but Nietzsche dared to say what few still will. You are not here to be well adjusted, you are here to become something rare. There's a man who was fired at 47, a corporate VP, who had done everything right. For months he spiraled, drinking, shame, silence. But in that quiet, something stirred. He began painting again, something he hadn't done since he was 16. Today, he's broke, but at peace. He says, losing everything is what gave me my life back. There's a woman who left her marriage after 20 years, not because her husband was cruel, but because her soul was dying. She now lives alone, teaches yoga, and writes about grief. The hardest thing I ever did, she says, was walk away from a good enough life. These aren't just anecdotes, they're modern myths, acts of Amor Fati, people choosing to dance in the ruins rather than rebuild a prison. Visually, this transformation isn't clean. It's not a sunrise or a spark of inspiration. It's more like a forest fire, terrifying, destructive, but necessary. The ego burns, the persona melts. What's left is not a better version of you, but a truer one. Picture this: a man stands at the edge of a cliff. Behind him, a life that fit, but never felt like his. Ahead, darkness. He steps off, not because he's certain, but because he's done being someone else's version of himself. He falls, and falls, and falls, but then something strange happens. He stops falling, and starts dancing. This is not metaphor, it's the truth behind every real transformation. You don't get better, you die to who you were, and resurrect as something terrifyingly free. Here's the final twist. Nietzsche didn't believe in redemption through God, but he still believed in redemption, through the will to power, through the art of becoming. In a world where meaning has collapsed, the only thing left is style, not fashion, but existential style, the courage to craft a life, not from safety, but from soul. He who has a why to live, can bear almost any how. In the end, Nietzsche was not a nihilist, he was a fire starter, a myth maker, a man who refused to look away from the void, and dared us to find beauty in it. A man stands alone in a dark field, the sky is cracked open above him, stars like ancient eyes, around him, the wreckage of who he used to be. He closes his eyes, breathes in the silence, then, slowly, he begins to move, not in fear, not in panic, but in rhythm, with grace. He dances, not to escape the abyss, but because he finally knows he belongs in it. Models and cinematic symbolism, we show how Nietzsche's madness contained a strange kind of hope. A man walks into the abyss, but instead of falling, he starts to dance. What if this wasn't a breakdown, but a doorway? What if the dread you've been feeling in the pit of your stomach, that quiet whisper at 3 a.m. asking, "Is this it?" wasn't anxiety, but a message? A knock from something buried long ago, not a crisis, but a calling. This is where Nietzsche wanted to bring you, not to despair, but to decision. He didn't write for comfort. He didn't write for followers. He wrote for the few, the ones willing to stand naked before the void, and choose, because that's the final truth. You must choose, not between success and failure, not between happiness and pain, but between obedience and becoming. In a world that wants you predictable, Nietzsche demands something outrageous. Become who you are, not who your parents dreamed you'd be, not the role your job gave you, not the mask you wear at parties, but something far more dangerous. Someone utterly and terrifyingly real. This isn't a motivational quote. It's a sentence. To become who you are means to die to the life that isn't yours, to let go of the borrowed dreams, the safety nets, the roles you've outgrown, to face the abyss without flinching, to ask yourself, if I stripped away everything false, what would remain? Nietzsche never gave you answers. He gave you fire, and now it's in your hands. The midlife collapse, no one talks about. It's not the end, it's not even the middle, it's the beginning, if you let it be. Because the abyss doesn't just devour, it reveals that thing you feared, that terrifying emptiness. It isn't there to punish you, it's there to free you. You see, the system has always offered you comfort, and in return, it demanded your soul. The abyss, it offers you nothing, but in that nothing, you can build anything. Every section you've seen until now, every crack in the illusion, every unraveling belief, every encounter with your own shadow, has led here, this moment. So what will you do? Will you numb again? Will you scroll again? Will you chase another temporary high, just to avoid the long cold look in the mirror? Or will you stay? Will you sit with the discomfort? Will you finally let it speak? The question is no longer, what's wrong with my life? It's what kind of life could I build if I stopped running? Because somewhere under the noise, under the shoulds and the guilt and the fear, under the exhaustion of pretending to be fine, there is a flicker, a spark. It's been waiting for you to stop performing, to stop conforming, to stop apologizing, waiting for you to remember that you were not made to obey, you were made to become. You've seen the lies, you've stared into the abyss. Now you face the final question. What will I become? Now that I know the truth, there is no map, no guru, no guarantee, just one step, and the courage to take it. And maybe, if you're willing to let go of the life that was never yours, you won't fall, you'll rise, you'll burn, you'll become. Most people think the abyss is the end, But what if it's just the place where masks finally fall away? The pain you've carried, the confusion, the doubt, the restless ache that keeps you up at night, it's not weakness, it's a signal, a quiet rebellion, a reminder that somewhere deep inside, something real is still alive. Nietzsche never promised comfort. He promised something far more dangerous, the possibility of becoming someone no system can predict, no algorithm can control, and no mirror can fully reflect. If you've made it this far, maybe it's because part of you is already done pretending, so don't rush to fix the cracks. That's where the light gets in. Don't run from your chaos. That's where your power lives. The world doesn't need another perfect person. It needs you, terrifyingly real, beautifully unfinished, and wildly free. Keep walking. We'll be right here when you're ready to dance.